Hello, everybody. Chris is coming.
Looks like Una wants to be our co-host tonight.
Yes, Una could be my co-host tonight. We're just waiting for our blog talk radio to come on, and then we will be ready to go. And Chris is getting the comment section set up. You know you're going to let Daddy sit there?
No.
I mean, it is National Pet Day, so she should be there.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
And now we're live with everybody. Yay!
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Oh, let's see. Yes, Una's already the star of the show.
Yes. And we have Nico over here sleeping, Vincent's over there doing something, and Lulu's just wandering around.
Yep. So they may all make their appearances on this National Cat Day. We shall see.
Pet Day.
Pet. What did I say?
Cat.
Cat. Oh, yes. Pet Day. My
Pet
bad.
Day.
Yes. It may as well be Cat Day in our house because that's all we have here. But National Pet Day.
Yes.
So, and they have had a lovely day as they always do because they're cats.
Because they just sleep and eat and run around.
Yep. Sounds like fun.
Anybody else at home have trouble focusing today? We've been noticing this is like going through the rounds.
It's been a day. I don't know why, but here we are. It is what it is. Yes, Beth is back.
Yes, I have a voice again, which is why I wasn't on the last show. I'm still coughing my head off, but I have a voice again. And Vincent, that is not your drink, that's my drink.
Yes. We do, of course, have our spirits this evening because, well, we are going to be chatting up Haunted Distilleries.
It's medicine.
Yes. Haunted Distilleries Volume 1.
They're going to be 2 later on.
Yes.
That script's already roughed out.
Yep. So, we got a lot going on. It's been a busy couple weeks.
Yes.
Yep. So, things are, weather's starting to warm up a little bit. The schedule's starting to warm up a little bit. So, we got tours going Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and in just a couple very short months from now, we'll be in full swing with tours Wednesday through Sunday.
Yep. Other big news, we are starting a newsletter.
Yes. Yep, newsletter is, it's basically up and running.
Yep.
If you go ahead and sign up for it, you're going to get a welcome to the newsletter email, but the first actual newsletter will probably be out in about, maybe the end of this week, early next week, something like that. So, but if you want to sign up for said newsletter, easiest thing to do is go to our website, hauntsofrichmond.com, and up in the top bar you will see a link that specifically says newsletter. It'll take you to our newsletter page where you just put in your email address, your at least your first name, and you're good to go. Hit submit on that and you're good to go. You'll be on our newsletter, you'll get that welcome email, and
I think Patrick just posted the link.
That's the one, yes it is. So thank you, Patrick, for posting that, and that's exactly where you need to go if you want to sign up for our newsletter, which we are excited to be rolling out.
Say hi. Vincent's like, yeah, no, mommy.
Yeah. So we got that going on. Been a little slow in getting things up to speed on the YouTube channel, but there are a few videos up there. I need to get to posting a few more. But basically, if you've been watching our show, they're
the same thing.
They're the same things. We're just sharing them to a new platform to gain a wider audience.
Yes.
So,
but that is slowly a work in progress because it is a time generator thing. So
yeah, yep, it takes a little bit of time, and time can be a premium sometimes. So
yes. So.
But yes. So, anyways,
cheers.
Cheers, everybody. I'm trying to think anything else right now. Nothing I can think of right now. We'll go ahead. We'll get on with the show. But thanks again for everybody tuning in tonight, and cheers.
Yes, wet that whistle so you can have fun with us. Said wet that whistle so you can have fun with us.
Oh, I get to start.
You get to start.
Oh, okay. All right. So, let's see. In the beginning, there was the water of life.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yes. So, in the monasteries of early medieval Ireland, monks would distill alcohol, which they called ulsabatha, which translates roughly to the water of life. The monks refined this process after traveling across Europe and observing the process by which perfumes were crafted. Fun fact number 1 for the evening. Yes, distillation is one process that can be used for creating perfumes. The monks tweaked the distillation process to suit their own needs and desires, and then used the technique to make a boozy liquid that was flavored with herbs and spices for drinking. While the Scottish lay claim to the earliest documented mention of whiskey back in 1494, made by Friar John Core, the Irish may have been the first to actually craft distilled alcohols, arguably with mixed success. Another document from the Annals of Conmagnois from the year 1405 indicates that a local clan chief, Richard Magrinal, died after supping on the water of life. The clan chief reportedly developed a fire in the pit of his stomach, which subsequently led to his sudden death. It's unclear whether the chief indulged too much, received a badly distilled batch with lethal amounts of methanol, whether he may have had other underlying health issues, or perhaps was even poisoned outright. Regardless of the cause, the water of life was forever linked with the unfortunate chief's death. As time passed, the Irish and Scottish both gained notable reputation for producing quality spirits, and while the two cultures have historically gotten along with each other fairly well, they are individually both very defensive of their respective beverages.
Don't mix them up.
The Irish added an E to the word whiskey to differentiate their product from their Scottish neighbours. While many will call Scottish whiskey Scotch, to give the impression that the two are completely different despite their many similarities. We could talk endlessly on the topic of Irish whiskey versus Scotch, particularly if we start to go ahead and throw in Kentucky Bourbon in the mix, which we'll be making an appearance on this evening's show.
Because I had to.
Yep, but we're here to talk about the permanent resident spirits that reside in many distilleries. If you're a big fan of distilled liqueur, you might understand the desire to hang out where your favorite beverage is made after your time on the mortal coil has passed. And some distilleries, having hundreds of years of history, have allowed for there to be plenty of time for some spooky stuff to happen in these storied establishments. So, now, I will say, right out of the gate, obviously, there are a lot more distilled liquors besides whiskey, Scotch, and bourbon. A lot more. You know, you got your vodkas, your rums, you got all that stuff. And some of those may make an appearance in our Volume 2, but tonight's episode is basically going to be focused on Irish whiskey, Scotch, and bourbon. So, because there was just enough material there to work with. So, that will be our Volume 1 tonight. And as such, we are going to be starting in Ireland. So, it didn't take the Irish too terribly long to determine that whiskey should be regulated, with King James I issuing a license to Sir Thomas Phillips to distill whiskey on April 20th, 1608 on property in County Antrim. This was the origin of the famous Bushmills, the oldest surviving licensed distillery in the world. While that alone gives Bushmills some major bragging rights, there's one thing that Bushmills likes even more about their history. That King James I, that granted them the distilling license, is the same King James that had the Bible translated, but the distilling license came first because, you know, priorities. The first license paved the way for many other distillers to produce and refine their own whiskies, including Kilbeggan Distillery in County Westmeath. The stills of Kilbeggan date back to 1757 when Matthew McManus founded the operation. McManus's family oversaw the operations until the business was acquired by John Locke in 1843. Locke's distillery ran successfully for many years before Prohibition, trade wars, and an aging infrastructure eventually made operations unsustainable, forcing the distillery to close in 1958 after 201 years of trade. Fortunately, this wasn't the end for Kilbeggan and Locke's, as the doors reopened in 1987 under new management. Today, Kilbeggan, Locke's Blend, and Locke's Malt whiskies are now produced at the site. Original distillery features, including a water wheel and a steam engine, have been fully restored, and a museum and restaurant are also on site for the enjoyment of guests. In addition to the distillery staff, there are some very different spirits who are said to be keeping an eye on the day-to-day operations of the distillery. Since 2007, a mysterious figure in a black robe has been spotted in the courtyard. It is possible that the spirit may be related to a Cistercian abbey that once stood nearby and which was dissolved in 1539. Loud noises and the sound of footsteps have been heard emanating from empty lofts, and the sound of whispering is also common when the building is quiet.
Or have a cat problem. For some time, the locals and the staff have told of close encounters and strange noises around the distillery grounds. Many skeptics disregard this as hearsay, and at least until the Irish distillery became well known for its spooky reputation, then it attracted the attention of a psychic who performed a seance at the location. In addition to the monks who still haunt the grounds, the psychic also made contact with several individuals with strong ties to the distillery. And he said, previous owners to the distillery linger on, including Kilbeggan, the founder Matthew McManus, and his son John. Matthew seems content with the current operation, likely aided by the strong historical acknowledgments across the property. However, John couldn't let go of the past and couldn't let it rest. He expressed anger over his execution at the hands of British for breaking curfew in 1798. The British alleged John was a member of the United Irishmen, an organization that sought the rights of a republic independent of Great Britain. The psychic went on to describe a vision of workers gathering to present former owner John Locke a gift. Gathering to present former owner John Locke a gift. In 1866, Kilbeggan's boiler exploded, and the workers presented John Locke with a new one. John Locke also seemed to linger on at the distillery in his own right, apparently upset about his own death, which he felt had come too soon. Lastly, the psychic claimed to meet Flo Locke, the last Kilbeggan managers before it closed, who recently recounted her sadness at the distillery falling silent in 1954 and her great joy at its reopening in 2007. Despite some individual personal grievances, spirits generally seem to be satisfied that Kilbeggan, a place in their lives, is back and thriving today. Any comments?
A few comments,
Or
but
questions?
not questions. Nope.
Okay, so we're going to pop over to Scotland, and we're going to go to Glen Spey Distillery. Moving across, of course, the Irish Sea, we end up in Scotland, where we find the small town of Ross in the County Speyside region. There are 5 distilleries in Ross, including Glen Spey Distillery. Despite being relatively small and obscure distillery, Glen Spey has a rich and intriguing history. Over the years, Glen Spey has shared the town of Ross with 4 other distilleries: Glenrothes, Glengrant, Speyburn, and Cavendish. Glen Spey's production is relatively modest compared to its neighbors, which explains why it can stay off of so many people's radars. It started its life as an oatmeal mill in the shadow of the ruins of Ross Castle, the great ancient seat of the Leslie family, and once, of course, home to the infamous Wolf of Glenrothes, Alexander Stewart. The mill's founder, James Stewart, was a corn merchant before he branched out into whiskey. The distillery was founded in 1878, and the Stewart family simply added distilling equipment to the building. In 1887, it was sold to the London-based Gilbey Company. The distillery survived a small fire in 1920, and in 1962, Gilbey Company merged with the United Wine Traders, who were responsible for the production of J&B blended whiskey. In 1970, the number of stills were increased from 2 to 4, bringing the distillery's production capacity to its modern-day level. Under the merge, Glen Spey became a major part of the J&B blend. Glen Spey survived a series of corporate mergers, and in the late 20th century, finally resulting in the Diageo obtaining the site. In an interesting twist, the distillery's acquisition was by the beverage giant gave its first chance to shine as an individual brand. Glen Spey, for which over 100 years had largely been used as a component in blended Scotch, released its first official single malt bottling in 2001, a 12-year-old Scotch whiskey released as part of Diego's Flora and Fauna range. which was well received by the Scotch lovers. Now back to our spooky stuff. Glen Spey is the distinction of hosting a spirit of spectral sort. The story story of the ghost dates back to the Second World War, when distilleries often doubled as temporary housings for soldiers. One unfortunate soldier met his end far from the battlefields of mainland Europe, within the confines of the distillery. Details are scarce on the incident, but the man is said to have accidentally electrocuted himself while lodging at Glen Spey and died. It is said that his spirit still roams around the grounds every night and still wearing his uniform, carrying his rifle, as if he is ready for battlefields that he never saw. Well, I guess they've got, extra security.
Yes. Yep. Nobody's going to be messing with that.
Any fun comments?
Oh,
No more Unas on the table?
Nope. I think she's
pouting.
she's pouting somewhere, which is a little concerning in its own right. But Patrick loves his wolves. But let's see. Oh, and Alex loves the themed attire too, which I had to ask, do you have any Scotch? Because we are actually plumb out. We have plenty of whiskey.
And I drink and I know things.
We have several varieties of Jameson in the house. We have Tullamore Dew. So
a couple of whiskeys, couple of bourbons. Out of Scotch though.
Out of Scotch. Might have to go shopping. Oh darn.
What did Merlin just write?
Timberwolves make excellent companion animals. And Roberta, werewolves of Richmond. We do have that story of the Richmond werewolf.
Yes, Henrico werewolf.
Henrico werewolf, excuse me, seen running across the Henrico or Highland Springs golf course once upon a time.
It's a very weak story.
It is. We generally don't share it because that's about all we know about it. Somebody says they saw a werewolf on the Highland Springs golf course some time ago.
I claim Big Dog or somebody in a suit. Just saying.
Is what it is. But
maybe not.
We'll come back and revisit werewolves again someday because that was a fun episode. And there's way more stories to share, of course. So, our next stop, actually, I say our next stop, we're not going far. It's going to keep us right there in Rothes. So we move a mere half mile down the road to Glenrothes Distillery. Founded in 1878, there is a lot of history here, and with the cemetery just across the street, many would suspect that the area is ripe for paranormal activity. Before diving into that, there is one interesting and creepy item of note about Glenrothes and its neighboring cemetery. Scotland's environment provides a ripe breeding ground for a particular type of black fungus that can be found in many places, including almost every Scotch distillery, except Glenrothes. The fungus can be seen blackening the gravestones across from Glenrothes, adding to the eerie atmosphere, but some unknown cause has kept the fungus from creeping into the distillery proper. I don't know if we have a mycologist in the house that can explain this fungal phenomenon. I don't expect that we do, and because honestly, I had to look up mycologist. It's a mushrooms expert, mushroom scientist. I don't think we have any of those in our fan base that I'm aware of. But I digress. Anyways, so in 1894, Major James Grant, owner of Glengrant Distillery, just north of Glenrothes Distillery, was on a hunting trip in Mpumalanga, Africa, which is now part of Zimbabwe, when he came across a young boy who had been abandoned in the bush. The boy's family could not be found, and Grant was kind enough to take him in and bring him home to Scotland. Named Byway, he grew up in the village of Ross, attending the local school and later working as a page boy, then butler. Then, with the onset of World War I, he found himself conscripted into the army. He joined the Northamptonshire Regiment stationed at Fort George and later served in the Middle East. He was awarded the British War Medal and the Victory Medal. After his unit disbanded, he returned to Ross and resumed his duties at Glenrothes House. He also joined the local amateur football team, Ross Victoria, where he earned the reputation as a solid and reliable goalkeeper. It has been said that he was the only African butler to ever play for a Scottish team. When his playing days were over, he remained loyal to the team and regularly attended home games after the club joined the Highland League as Roth's FC. Indeed, he became so much of a fixture that he was eventually given a complimentary seat in the stands and a half-time cup of tea. On the rare occasion when he watched Roths at an away match, he traveled on the team bus. In 1931, Major Grant died, but made provisions for his heirs to make sure that Byway maintained a comfortable life. Glengrothes House was requisitioned during World War II, and Byway was forced to take on employment as a servant in Lossiemouth. We'll go with that, Lossiemouth. He did not enjoy this. After the war, he did return home to Roths. However, Glengrothes House was turned into flats and let out to the Glengrothes Distillery workers. Byway was to find himself living in one of the apartments, and provision was made for him to get his meals daily from the Seafield Arms in the village. Byway passed away in 1972, and while nobody knew his exact age, he was thought to have been at least around 80 years old. He left his life savings to Roth's Football Club, and Byway was laid to rest in a grave overlooking the Glenrothes Distillery, seemingly at eternal rest. In 1980, a new still house was opened at Glenrothes Distillery, but the new No. 3 still was not performing as well as it should. Around this time, Byway began to make appearances at the Glenrothes Distillery. One thing was for sure, Byway was not haunting the distillery in search of a dram. He never had developed a taste for the local whiskey. His cocktail of choice was a gin and tonic. Byway would be seen just hanging around the still room and always on rough nights when the Highland winds were howling. The master distiller saw him calmly standing beside the new stills, his long white hair flowing, and immediately recognized him as the celebrated local favorite Byway. The story of the Glenrothes apparition reached to the ears of Cedric Wilson, a professor of pharmacology at University College Dublin. He was also an expert in paranormal phenomena and in ley lines. Although the distillery management was highly skeptical, they gave the professor permission to visit the distillery during the distillery's silent period in August of 1981. The professor investigated and found that the new stills unwittingly disturbed a ley line.
Oops.
Wilson then said to have gone to the neighboring graveyard to chat to Byway's gravestone. He communicated with Byway, who expressed his concern that the new stills needed to be moved or the spirit might be affected. The spirit as in the liquid this time. This line passed through Roth's Castle, the distillery, Roth's Cemetery, and from thence to the Colburn Stone to the Pictish Fort at Burghead. Iron rods were hammered into the damaged ley line to correct the energy flow. The stills were then moved, and Byway has not been seen since. Still, many toasts to the ghost have taken place since in order to avoid any more trouble at Glenrothes Distillery.
Well, he did let them know there was something wrong, even though it wasn't his drink. Got some comments?
You know they used fungi to space travel instantaneously in Star Trek Discovery. I do remember that too. And that is about the limits of Patrick's knowledge on the subject. I think we're probably matched on that point, yes.
All right, so we're going to pop over to another one in Speyside, which is the GlenDronach Distillery. This is a little to the east of Ross, where we just were, in the valley of Forgu. Over the course of 200 years, GlenDronach has become well known for aging its Scotch in sherry casks. And they think that the distillery's resident spirit may have actually caught a ride on one of those wooden storage vessels from its home country of Spain. Yes, you did hear that right. We're talking about somebody who shipped themselves in a cask of sherry.
Yeah. I mean, granted, I could think of worse conveyance to this.
I mean, people go over the Niagara Falls in a barrel, so you know, hey. All right, so one day back in the 1970s at the GlenDronach's distillery, a shipment of Oloroso sherry's casks was being unloaded from the traditional dunnage warehouses, where an apparent stowaway was spotted darting away from the empty cask. She was described as being small and dark, dressed in a scarlet and black, wearing a full mantilla. The mantilla being the traditional lace or silk veil that is popular in Spanish fashion. This led to the legend of the beautiful Spanish woman inhabiting the distillery, with numerous sightings and the noise of rustling skirts alerting workers to her presence. But according to the folks at GlenDronach, the transition from the Spanish sun to the cold and damp of Aberdeenshire was not a happy one. The Spanish lady grew lonely and sought an escape from the unfamiliar surroundings. It's believed she stumbled upon the underground tunnel that led from the GlenDronach to the nearby Glen house, where she found peace, comfort, and lots of human spirits to keep her company. This beautiful home predated the distillery by about half a century, and it was used as a retreat for guests of the distillery today. Within Glen House, the Spanish lady chose to take up residence in the bedroom named GlenDronach, and many guests have seen her or felt her presence in the decades since her arrival, especially late at night after a few drams. A wee bit of dram.
Yeah, I want to read this one.
Yeah, this is his favorite one.
I want to visit this place because, well, it just... Yeah, it seems cool. We are sticking to Scotland, so we're not leaving Scotland quite yet, but we are going to sail to the remote Isle of Jura, off the west coast and just a stone's throw from its slightly more famous neighbor, the Isle of Islay. Legend has it that in 1781, Laird Archibald Campbell outlawed distilling on the Isle of Jura. 30 years later, he awoke in the dead of night to find a ghostly woman floating over him as he lay in bed, telling him off for the lack of whiskey on the island.
Don't piss off the ghosts.
It scared him so badly he not only reversed the ban, but he built a distillery in 1810 to appease the ghost, laying the foundations for Jura Scotch whisky. The original distillery struggled on and off through the balance of the 1800s before falling into disrepair and eventually being dismantled in 1900. Upon the removal of the distillery, it's said that a bottle of whiskey was buried at the site to keep the woman's thirst at bay. With the loss of the distillery, Jura languished and the population plummeted. Things started to brighten in the 1950s when two local property owners teamed up with distillery experts to revive the nearly forgotten distillery. After a tremendous amount of work, the modern Jura Scotch Whisky Distillery opened in 1963. While the ghostly woman who terrified Campbell about 150 years prior seems to have remained at rest, the modern distillery may have some spirits of its own. In 2010, a pair of journalists visited Jura to conduct paranormal investigations. Of course, one of their stops was the distillery, where they met up with the distillery's resident cat, Elvis. For his part, Elvis was agreeable when it came to participating in the investigation. The journalists fit a cat cam to Elvis's collar and set him about on his nightly rounds. While moving about the darkened distillery, Elvis's camera caught what seemed to be the spectral appearance of a woman. Eager to know if it was the whiskey-loving woman from generations ago, a psychic was called to follow up on the appearance. This psychic identified the woman in the modern distillery as Elizabeth Quinn, a name that was very familiar to a former distillery manager who remembered a teacher by that name who had resided on Jura many years ago, but not so long as to be the same spirit that visited Campbell. Now, at this point, I will say it is worth noting, somebody knows somebody, so knows somebody on Jura. Everybody knows everybody on Jura, because apparently there's about 212 people living on Jura. So, that's the entire population of the entire island. Very stable population, so much so that Jura Whisky, Scotch Whisky, actually named one of their releases the 212 in honor of the 212 residents of Jura. Back to that, Elizabeth's presence at the distillery is a little bit of a mystery, as their only common link is residing on the Isle of Jura. That said, what school teacher hasn't wanted a dram at least once to rinse away a challenging day in the classroom? In any case, the most important thing here is that Elizabeth seems to be a friendly spirit. They have never experienced malicious activity at the distillery, and a Jura brand ambassador even heard a disembodied voice late one night telling him the children are all right. One more fun paranormal note about Jura Scotch whiskey, this not being a haunting, but rather a foreshadowing. In 1700, the Laird of Clan Campbell evicted a wise old seer from her home on the island of Jura. Blessed with the gift of the third eye and incensed at her treatment, she prophesied that when the last Campbell left Jura, he would be one-eyed and his belongings would be drawn in a cart by a white horse. Fast forward to 1938. Charles Campbell, veteran of the Great War and blind in one eye from his service, headed down the ancient pier for one last time on a cart drawn by a single white horse. It is claimed that day the sound of the cart on the track could be heard for miles. Jura created a whiskey to commemorate this legend called Prophecy. I want to visit Jura.
I know. So do I. Any comments that we need to address? We need to answer.
Nope, nothing that we need to address on the air.
Okay, just thought I'd check before I started. So we're going to Islay now, to the Bowmore Distillery. This is, of course, a close neighbor, and the spirits that are produced in this part of Scotland are so distinct that they carry the name Islay on its 4 main types of Scottish whiskey, the others being Highland, Lowland, and Speyside. Islay Scotch is refined for a very specific taste, and they are renowned for their hearty, peat notes. So it's very smoky whiskey, or Scotch. Excuse me. I would encourage any distilled spirit lover to try an Islay Scotch at least once, but it's admittedly not for everyone. Brief Scotch lesson aside, the Isle of Islay is where we first head to for Bowmore, the oldest distillery on the island, and a place that is home to a fascinating tale. One dark and stormy night, of course, crofter Lachlan Bond spotted a ghostly silhouette of a headless horseman galloping away from his house. Disturbed by the frightful sight, Lachlan quickly entered his home, and the only thing that was out of place was a bottle of Bowmore on the table, with a large dram that was missing. Terrified that a headless spectre seemed to have partaken in the bottle, Lachlan committed a horrific atrocity. He threw away the not yet empty bottle of the treasured Scotch. No. No. Party foul.
I don't care if a spirit gets into my spirits. The bottles are not getting pitched empty. Or pitched with anything left in them.
Yeah. The story has been retold many times. Almost every type of Islay Scotch has been featured in that unfinished bottle that was left by Lachlan's table. Some have even tried to lend a logical explanation to the headless horseman as well, saying that the man riding away was Lachlan's brother, who had flipped up his collar so high that it was to fend off the elements. Regardless of how the story is told or how much or how little truth may be associated with it, it is deeply ingrained in the culture today. Today, any true ilk, the resident of Islay, will open a fresh bottle of local Scotch for guests and throw off the cork into the fire to prevent the headless horseman from returning to join them for a nip. Stories involving Bowmore don't stop with the headless horseman, of course. There is believed to be a resident spirit inside, residing along the liquid spirits of the distillery vaults. And then there's the time that the devil himself is said to have visited Islay, by the way. On a dark winter night in 1839, people of Islay found a demon believed to be the devil himself in a local church. The church just happened to be round, giving the devil no corner to hide in. So he fled the house of worship and was chased to the door of Bowmore Distillery, where he got lost. The island residents considered this victory enough, and they figured that the devil had packed himself into a whiskey barrel and was shipped away to the mainland. The legend became so prominent that Bowmore rolled out a special bottle called the Devil's Cask.
That's actually something I hadn't heard of before, the whole thing with the devil not having a corner to hide in.
Oh, I've heard that lots of times.
I don't know how I haven't heard that before. I mean, it's one of the...
And you being an engineer, too. How did you not know this?
I don't know. I mean, I guess, it makes sense in its own way. It's not exactly a surprising saying.
Didn't we talk about it in the Octagon House?
In what?
Octagon House?
Maybe. But that's been a year and a half ago now.
Yeah, I thought we talked about it in the
'Cause
Octagon House.
That Washington Octagon House, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which we did on Election Eve 2020, which was almost a year and a half ago now.
Yep.
Time flies.
All right. Moving
Anyways, so
on. Coming stateside.
yes, we are going to come stateside now. And of course, we mentioned bourbon, which means our first stop is going to be Kentucky. And here we find ourselves at Buffalo Trace Distillery that is in Frankfort, Kentucky.
Wet your whistle.
Wet my whistle. Now, it has historically been known by several names, including the George T. Stagg Distillery and the Old Fashioned Copper Distillery. Its namesake bourbon brand, Buffalo Trace Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, was introduced in August of 1999. The company claims the distillery is the oldest continuously operating distillery in the United States, and that the name Buffalo Trace refers to an ancient buffalo crossing on the banks of the Kentucky River in Franklin County. Now, under its old name, George T. Stagg Distillery, the property was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in May of 2001, and was designated a National Historic Landmark on March 11th, 2013. Despite Buffalo Trace Distillery's claims, another historic distillery, Burke's Distillery, which is used for the production of Maker's Mark, is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the oldest operating bourbon distillery. Records indicate that Burke's Distillery opened operations in 1805, but regardless of who claims the official mantle, Buffalo Trace does have a long and storied past. Now, it's believed that the first distilling that took place on the site of the current Buffalo Trace Distillery dates back to 1775, with the first building dedicated to distilling opening in 1858. In 1870, the distillery was purchased by Edmund H. Taylor and given its first name, the Old Fire Copper Distillery. Taylor sold the distillery 8 years later to George T. Stagg, and Stagg sank considerable resources into the distillery the years that followed, including a complete rebuild after the distillery burned after being struck by lightning in 1872. In 1886, Stagg installed steam heating in the storage warehouses, making them the first climate-controlled warehouse for aging whiskey in the nation. During Prohibition, the distillery was allowed to remain operational in order to make whiskey for medicinal purposes.
I told you, it's medicine.
Cheers to that. Now, in October of 2016, we took a big leap forward, during renovations to convert a building to a meeting and event space, workers discovered the foundation of the original distillery building that had burned 144 years prior, along with the remains of fermenters from that same year. The original distillery foundation was left in place after the fire, and an expanded distillery building was built as a replacement. The site is now open for visitors to Buffalo Trace. With such a long history, it's little surprise that Buffalo Trace Distillery has a resident ghost who can't seem to quit his job. Colonel Albert Blanton started as an office boy and worked his way up to company president in the early 1900s. Albert Blanton would dedicate more than half a century of his life to the crafting of Kentucky bourbon before passing away in 1959. While his mortal form may have left the property, many believe this respected Kentucky gentleman lingers on at the distillery that he cared for and loved for so many years. And if the Blanton name sounds familiar, it's because the famously fine crafted Blanton's single barrel bourbon, the bottle with the horse on top, is named after this man who contributed so much to the distillery and the industry as a whole.
So if you're curious to what it looks like, we have had a bottle. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It looks like this.
Yep, it was very tasty. Very tasty, very special. It was a gift, and
we loved it.
We loved it. It's the only bottle we've ever had. Might need to change that, though. Writing this kind of got me a little bit of a craving to...
You're not near the candle, right?
No.
Okay,
no.
good. Just
Back
making sure.
But, yeah.
Made me want to go buy some more. Because it was very good.
Yes. And that's another thing. We don't have any bourbon on the bar right now. It's all Irish whiskey.
No, we've got makers up there.
Oh, we do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We got makers
all
up
right.
there.
Never mind. Anyways.
We don't have that much, but we got some.
Yes. So, Anyways, Blanton isn't believed to be the only spirit at Buffalo Trace. As a matter of fact, paranormal investigators who have been allowed at the distillery think there may be as many as a couple dozen ghosts lingering amongst the legendary liquid spirits. Some of them can be quite a bit mischievous, pinching bottoms and leaving unexplained footsteps in warehouses. We're happy to say that Buffalo Trace embraced its spooky side, offering ghost tours beginning at Warehouse C. Distillery workers have reported seeing a wispy figure walking among the barrels. Lindsay Brewer, a Buffalo Trace ghost tour guide, says that many years ago, a foreman and his crew were moving barrels to another warehouse when he heard a voice that said, "Get out." Now, this isn't what you might think. He didn't see anyone around, so he thought nothing of it. Later, she says the same voice yelled, "Get out now." Again. Not actually malicious, because this is what followed. The foreman listened this time. The foreman booked it out of there. He told his men to get some fresh air, and moments after the last man left the warehouse, the building collapsed. So,
Good ghost.
good ghost. Not every ghost that yells, "Get out," is actually trying to say, bugger off. This one was trying to help, so kudos to a good ghost. Now, elsewhere on the property stands Stony Point Mansion, the home built in 1934 by Albert B. Blanton, and the location is ultimately where he passed away. Today it is used as office space for the distillery. Employees here will tell you they hear footsteps, feel an icy chill, and even recognize some ghostly humming or singing thought to be from the ghost of Blanton's housekeeper, Sarah. Miss Blanton was a lady, but it was a family secret that she was also a smoker. In some rooms you can smell cigarette smoke when no one is there. In a separate incident, one that may have involved the spirit of Albert Blanton himself, an employee was on their way to the Stony Point Mansion when they saw the figure of a gray man watching out one of the windows. When the figure abruptly vanished, the employees swore that they would never work in the mansion alone again. Visitors and staff members report hearing unexplained noises and people talking in Blanton's former meeting room. A security guard says he saw lights on in the gift shop after hours. When he spotted someone inside the building, he went to investigate, only to find it empty. Photos of similar incidents line the walls of Stony Point's basement. It's cool that I like when places like that embrace the spooky side.
Road trip.
Road trip. Seriously, Kentucky's on the list.
Alright, so now we're going over to Glen's Creek Distillery, still in Kentucky. This is a place that's had its fair share of unexplainable events. It's situated in the remaining section of the historic Old Crow Distillery. Glen's Creek opened in 2013 and added to the legacy, of course, of the Kentucky Bourbon. The history of the location dates back to Scottish immigrants named James Crow, who moved to Kentucky in 1823. Crow began his distilling career working for Colonel Willis Field over at Greer's Creek Distillery in 1835. He applied scientific methods to the production of bourbon. With the use of thermometers, hydrometers, and pH balance checks, Crow standardized the sour mash process, improving the quality. Crow later moved to Old Oscar Pepper Distillery, where he first produced his Old Crow brand of bourbon. Old Crow's logo, a crow perched on top of grains of barley, was symbolic of a bridge between the North and the South during the American Civil War. It came about after Pennsylvania Brigade training at State College. Pennsylvania thought that Old Crow was likely the only good thing to come out of the South. Fearing not being able to drink Old Crow again, the soldiers wrote to the President Lincoln proclaiming that we must not let a fine gentleman Old Crow escape, and that the Old Crow with the sharpest talons holds on to the barley forever. After the war concluded, the logo, which was a picture of James Crow, was swapped for a regular crow. At Old Oscar Pepper, William F. Mitchell reviewed Crow's meticulous notes and was able to replicate most of his processes. He left Old Oscar Pepper and went to work at the newly formed Gainesberry and Company in 1872. The bourbon produced at Gaines was named after Crow's recipe titled merely Old Crow. National distillers purchased Gaines in 1934, and the Old Crow brand prospered and became one of the first national whiskey brands. After World War II, national distillers began focusing on industrial distilling processes. Old Crow was refurbished with new equipment, including a copper column distiller, in the 1960s. National distillers also modified the amount of setback or the part of the spent mash added to a new batch and the sour mash process.
They messed with the recipe. Oops.
While costs were shaved, the quality also started to slide. Sales declined over the years, and in 1987, National Distillers sold their remaining interest in Old Crow to Jim Beam. The plant closed, and though some of the barrel houses were used for barrel storage by Jim Beam, 3 other warehouses, due to their age, were abandoned in the 1990s. Scrappers, under the guise of wood reclaimers, dismantled the column distiller and other metals in the complex in the 2000s. Neil Craig and his partner, David Merrier, have purchased the remains of the abandoned distillery in December of 2013. And while their partnership didn't last, Merrier stuck around to operate Glen's Creek Distilling at Old Crow today. He also hasn't been shy to share some of the odd experiences that he has had in the distillery at McCracken Pike. Merrier recalled how the metal steps outside that led up to the office have a really distinct sound. He would always be able to tell when somebody was coming up those steps. One day, and he said he was in the office alone, he heard the distinct sound of someone walking up the steps, but when he peeked out to see who was coming to join him, he found that he was still quite alone in the whole distillery. He's working at the small distillery. Those who have been working at the small distillery have said that they hear sample glasses scattering across the floors and the voices of people laughing and talking when the facility is empty. Paranormal investigations that have taken place at the site have come to the conclusion that a ghost of an old distiller and some employees from the generations past still linger at their old place of work. Given that Old Crow was once one of the top bourbons in America, it's understandable that some people who are so proud of their craft in life might still carry on after death. While you can't get a taste of Old Crow at Glen's Creek Distilling today, you can find it as one of the brands that Jim Beam proudly produces today. That is said, a visit to Glen Creek would still be worth the while. And of course, if somebody wants their bourbon and fancy historic surroundings with their tasting.
Time to go bourbon distillery hopping?
Yes.
Alright, so we are going to move along to Main Street in downtown Louisville. Now, Doc Crow's Smokehouse and Raw Bar sits next to the Old Forester Distillery. Both are located on the former site of the Old Galt House Hotel, once a popular stop on Louisville's Whiskey Row. The original Galt House opened in 1835 and hosted Jefferson Davis, Charles Dickens, Abraham Lincoln, and Ulysses S. Grant. According to some accounts, the Galt House is where Grant and General William Tecumseh Sherman devised their plan to capture Atlanta during the Civil War. The hotel was also the site of at least 2 murders. Union General Jefferson C. Davis, not to be confused with the Confederate president, shot and killed General William Bull Nelson after a dispute. Prominent Louisville resident Alfred Victor DuPont died after his mistress shot him when he refused to take responsibility for her pregnancy. It's been reported that DuPont still walks the streets of Louisville dressed in a black tuxedo and top hat, carrying a gold-tipped cane. After the original Galt House went out of business in 1919, other businesses moved in. Over the years, ghosts have been blamed for setting fires and running over people with runaway whiskey barrels. Staff at the high-end barbecue joint says that glasses fly off the shelves and furniture moves on its own. At the distillery, ghostly activity seems to be a daily occurrence. Security guard Zach Evans divulges that several employees have stories about ghostly encounters. He says he frequently sees the ghosts himself. On numerous occasions, he's seen a man who isn't there. It started one day when he was getting off the elevator, and he just saw this older gentleman. He had a mustache and a beard that was all gray, and he was dressed like a worker. He was just standing there, looking at me through the door. Then he just walked off. We checked the video, and there was no one there. After that, he saw him every day for the following week. Other stories include people walking through walls and visions of a woman in white. One person claims to have seen a ghost slowly drinking bourbon from a sealed barrel or sealed bottle in an executive's office. Seems to be a spirit with good taste in spirits.
So it's not Slimer. Not Slimer.
Not Slimer. All right. Am I continuing?
I think so.
Okay.
Somebody's demanding attention.
Somebody, let's see, so... Are we going to learn about the origin of the Green Fairy if there is one on one of these haunted distillery live streams?
I'm trying to remember if that's on the extras. If not, I can put it there.
So, Green Fairy.
I can work on the absinthe Green Fairy.
Noted.
I'm pretty sure I have that story somewhere. Pretty sure I do.
We'll have to make sure it winds up in volume 2 when we get back to that in probably a couple months' time.
It'll be July.
So, a few months' time.
Yeah.
We will
I
be
think
getting
that's when
back to
I have
that.
it scheduled.
Let's see.
Plenty of time to make sure I have that story, though.
Yeah, mischievous ghosts are fun to watch, but it's a whole nother thing when they start lighting fires and throwing whiskey barrels at you. Yeah.
Well, my question then is, what did you do to piss them off?
Yeah.
I mean, that takes a lot of energy. You pissed something off.
Yeah. And Alex does, yeah, there is always a woman in white.
Yes.
There are women in white everywhere when it comes
If
to
it's
the
not
hauntings.
white, it's blue.
Yes.
And occasionally the red.
Got Lulu over here. Hey, Lulu.
All right, where are we going next?
All right, okay, yes.
Yeah, back to
So,
the stories.
back to the stories, yep. Sorry, cat.
Yes, distraction, we know.
Now,
Focus.
Now, I gotta admit, we are ending this one on a little bit of an odd note. Because we are going to leave Kentucky. We are going to actually head to California. Now,
That one I was not expecting, by the way.
well, I've heard the stories about this place before, and we will end this on a cautionary note. This place will probably sound familiar to some of you if you watch shows like Taps,
Ghost Hunters.
Ghost Hunters, yes. I'm pretty sure that this place showed up on there and was rather infamous in its in what they found there because, well, yeah, it was basically, yeah. I'll get back to that. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So, now, while the West Coast is generally not well known as the distilling hotspot,
They're known for their wineries.
They have their wineries. People all over the world have a fondness for liquid spirits, and where there is demand, someone is sure to pop up as a local supplier. This was particularly true during Prohibition, when the San Mateo coast was an ideal spot for rum running, bootleggers, and speakeasies. One of the most successful speakeasies of the era was Frank's Place on the cliffs at Moss Beach. Built by Frank Torres in 1927, Frank's became a popular night spot for silent film stars and politicians from the city. Mystery writer Dashiell Hammett frequented the place and used it as a setting for one of his detective stories. The restaurant, located on a cliff above a secluded beach, was a perfect location to benefit from the clandestine activities of Canadian rum runners. Under cover of darkness and fog, illegal whiskey was landed on the beach, dragged up a steep cliff, and loaded into the waiting vehicles for transport to San Francisco. Some of the booze always found its way into the garage beneath Frank's Place. Frank Torres used his excellent political and social connections to operate a highly successful, if illegal, business. Unlike many of the other speakeasies along the coast, Frank's Place was said to have never been raided. With the repeal of Prohibition in 1933, Frank Torres remained in the food service business as one of the most successful restaurateurs along the San Mateo County coastline. Frank's Place, now called the Moss Beach Distillery, still retains its spectacular view and secluded location above the ocean coves. The distillery also retains one of Frank's former customers as well, its resident ghost, the Blue Lady. Still haunts the premises, trying to recapture the romance and excitement of Frank's speakeasy years. She is the perfect ghost. She's said to glide through rooms, gently swing chandeliers, murmur and laugh, and sometimes touch unsuspecting visitors. She is beautiful and wistful, forever gazing out to the Pacific Ocean in her glistening blue dress. The Blue Lady of the Moss Beach Distillery is perhaps Northern California's single most famous ghost. She's featured constantly on most haunted lists and is an attraction unto herself at the restaurant. There are a number of iterations on the Blue Lady story, and almost all are set during Prohibition. Commonly, she's a local girl who falls in love with a restaurant's pianist. Sometimes they're torn apart by a love triangle, other times she is unhappily married and the spurned husband kills her, and sometimes the pianist, in a fit of rage. In one version, the despondent, lovelorn woman drowns herself in the sea. Then there's The Girl with the Silver Eyes. It's not Dashiell Hammett's best story, and it's far from his most famous. It tells the tale of a private eye who goes in search of crooks at a roadhouse south of San Francisco. The Roadhouse is a famed spot for rum runners. The story is set during Prohibition and plays host to a strange, intoxicating femme fatale. She was a slender girl in a glistening blue gown that exhibited a generous spread in front and back and arms that were worth showing, Hammett writes. She had a mass of dark brown hair above an oval face of the color that pink ought to be. Her eyes were wide-set and of a gray shade that wasn't altogether unlike the shadows on polished silver that the poet had compared them to. If you haven't read the story, you'd never see the parallels. But once you have, it's impossible to not think of the Blue Lady. All that said, we would like to end this episode on a slightly different and cautionary note. While the desire to explain a haunting can be immense, it can also be easy to jump to some erroneous and often downright sketchy conclusions, as is exhibited in this last possible origin story for the Moss Beach Distillery's Blue Lady. In the 1990s, a new owner asked psychic Sylvia Brown to stop by for a visit. In March 1992, she took a walk around the property and immediately began talking about a woman named Mary Morley. She had no prompting and no background information, the Examiner reported. Considering she'd had a year's warning, though, she had ample time to do a little research. But she made a mistake that would soon become evident. In April, Brown told her newsletter subscribers she would be holding a seance at the Moss Beach Distillery. They assembled in a private dining room and held their breath as Brown called upon the dead. There were 3 ghosts, forever trapped in an ill-fated love triangle with them in the room. One was Mary Morley, a married woman. Another was John Katana, a handsome playboy. And the third was Anna Philbrook, another pretty paramour of Catina's. John Catina's. Brown said Mary Morley loved Catina, who was two-timing her with Anna. Anna, for unclear reasons, threw herself into the ocean and drowned. Mary died of crushing injuries to her head and chest. When restaurant staffers went looking for Mary Morley in San Mateo County archives, they were astonished to find a woman with her name died in a highway crash in 1919. This, believers say, is proof she is the Blue Lady of Moss Beach. There are a number of problems with this origin story, however. The first is that the car crash happened nowhere near Moss Beach. Contemporary newspaper stories report the woman was driving home to Redwood City after an evening seeing friends in San Francisco. The car overturned near Visitation Valley, crushing her to death. There is nothing to indicate she had any connection to Moss Beach or its famed tavern, which didn't even exist at the time of her death. In addition, there are no John Catinas or Anna Philbrooks in the Bay Area census records who could be the right people for Brown's ghost story. And there's no Anna who cast herself into the sea in any newspaper archives. Were one to hazard a guess, Brown, or an intrepid staffer, discovered the death certificate of a young woman who had died in a San Mateo County highway accident, erroneously assumed that it was on Highway 1 near Moss Beach, and turned her into the Blue Lady. The story, over the past 3 decades, stuck, and that is one of the more favored versions of the tale today, despite the fact that it has basically zero substantiating evidence to go along with it. So, sometimes you gotta kind of have to take stories a little bit of face value, listen with a skeptical ear, stuff like that. So, But getting back to what I was mentioning before with ghost hunters, if this is the same place I'm thinking of, when they went there, they had activity off the charts. But this activity, they quickly found, was in all kinds of little staged things
I remember this one.
Yeah, staged things all over the bar. They had a little mechanism to make the little lights over the bar swing, as if something was making them swing. They had a little mannequin type thing hidden behind a one-way mirror to make people think that they had somebody looking back at them in the mirror. So this restaurant was all kinds of set up, not only as a restaurant, but as a quasi-haunted house, and they did not warn the Taps folks of any of this before they went in for their investigation. Taps was none too pleased to go in there and find all this fake stuff intentionally set up to convince people that hauntings were going on.
Yeah.
That said, they did get a little, when they went outside...
They got some stuff on the cliffs.
Yeah, that's where the Blue Lady is frequently seen, on the cliffs outside overlooking the ocean. They did get a little something out there, but not exactly the strongest evidence they've ever gathered on an investigation.
Yeah.
But that was a stop that did not ultimately set well with them. I think it's got to be at least a good 10 years since that episode. It was a long time ago now, relatively speaking. So you always kind of have to be a little...
It's a cool looking place, but just beware that, this is one where it looks like a tale was invented to bring people in.
Yep. So, but let me see... Yeah, Patrick shared the Wikipedia for Moss Beach Distillery. Thank you. Okay, the music from the... when I say cantina, the music from the Star Wars cantina. Yep. And yes, so I'm not misremembering that episode. Patrick remembers it too. That was a pretty messed up episode.
Yep.
But that is our last story for this evening.
Yeah, so next time, this one's going to be fun. Haunted Amusement Parks, Part 1.
Yes.
I had a lot of fun with this one, and this one we actually got the inspiration from it from Guy Hutchinson. This is his Bippity Boppity Boozy book that takes you drinking through Disney, and he has, let's just say, it's the copycat recipe book for the drinks at Disney.
Yeah.
With some of his own improvements and some fun stories in it. But he actually was at GalaxyCon that Chris and I went to a month ago, and he actually did a story of, or a session on terror in the amusement parks that was looking at both ghost stories and the October terrors that now are like going through all of the amusement parks. So we got a couple of ghost stories from him from Disney, and that just launched me off, and I went and had fun down that research hole.
So I'm just putting his name into the chat. So yeah, that's Guy Hutchinson, who really nice guy. Got the opportunity to chat with him for a few minutes when we were there.
Does a lot of Disney blogs, so he's really fun to watch, and just go check out his stuff. And he's got several books out.
Yep. So
including his own fictional ghost story at Disney.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
A
couple of Disney employees that were kind of somewhat a little bit of not your typical Disney employees. Apparently they were kind of slacker-esque or something like that. Wind up dying in a car crash, and they are kind of bored, and they decide they have nothing better to do than go back and haunt Disney World. Yep. So.
Because, happiest place on earth, right?
Yep, why not? But yeah, so that was that got the ball rolling in our heads about this. Oh, and he did one on
abandoned amusement parks.
Abandoned amusements, and also like some of the scariest attractions that have ever been as well. So got us thinking, and
so now we have part 1 and part 2. We're going to do them back to back.
Yep, and that is the guy. Yep. So. Anyway, so yes, that draws us to a close for this evening. So thank you again to everybody for watching.
Yep.
just a quick reminder, again, you can go and sign up for our newsletter. The first newsletter is going to come out before we do our next show in 2 weeks. That's one thing I can say for sure. If you want to go ahead and provide some feedback for it, we definitely appreciate that. It's going to be my first shot out of the gate, actually writing some sort of newsletter to send out. So feedback is appreciated. And anyways,
Yep. And also remember, Haunted Key West is still available. We still have some spots available. So definitely, if you want to come out on that, we look forward to it. I just posted or shared a memory of Hemingway cats from 2 trips ago.
Yep.
And so yes, definitely we are going to be going and visiting the Hemingway house while we're down there, which is also haunted. We've talked about this.
Even though
Haunted Key West.
It's not on the official itinerary.
But you got your days open, so
Yes.
You're going to go.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So, with that, I think that's it.
Yep. I think we covered everything
we covered everything else. So again, thanks everybody for watching. And as always, if you have any questions or anything or whatever, just want to chat between now and the next episode, drop us a note. Or better yet, come on out and see us on a tour. We'd love to actually see you in person. It'd be fantastic. So with that, we bid you all a good night. See y'all later.
Bye.